Chapter 23. Deception 3-4. Chapter 10. Deception 3-4, 1996, 1997. Percy is 20 and 33, Severus is 35, Harry is 16, and Dumbledore has 1 year left to live. January 1997, a few days before the spring term begins, Severus informs him that McGonagall plans to be at headquarters to check in on him. Percy has not had the chance to speak to her since their tense meeting last summer, so he supposes it's for the best, though his stomach curls uncomfortably at the thought. He had been rash, last time, to put her on Dumbledore's scent. What if her investigation yielded something Percy was not ready to explain, or put Dumbledore on the defense? What if Dumbledore successfully waylaid her, and now she will have even less cause to trust him? But when he nervously arrives in Regulus' room, dressed in those same maroon robes that Auntie Muriel bought for him, he finds that her primary objective seemed to be merely to ascertain that he is well. Severus would be able to inform you of my continued health, he tells her, feeling a bit bewildered. McGonagall sniffs at him from where she has settled herself behind Regulus' desk. Severus would say you were well so long as you were alive. Percy snaps his mouth shut only a second before he points out that being alive is all they can ask for in these dark times. She gives him an arch look and enacts a cleaning charm with more force than is necessary on the desk. Percy sneezes as a cloud of dust dissipates into the air. He cleans the room regularly, he does, but something about the Black family manor seems to encourage incessant griminess. Percy cannot imagine his mother existing in such a dirty, oppressive place for very long. No wonder she moved back to the burrow, for Delius be damned. Once they are able to skirt past the conversation minefield that small talk begets these days, Percy finds himself opening his mouth and telling her about his sessions with the Dementors. He does not tell her why he is so hell-bent on finding his soul, and she does not ask. Perhaps she has learned that he has reason for his secrets, or perhaps she, like he, is relieved to have an academic question to ponder, rather than one of morality. She eagerly accepts his theory that the best way to scry for one's own soul, as nebulous as an idea that may be, is to first attempt the animagus transformation, though she does remind him that he is still a magical creature, insofar as his magical core remains with him, even as he changes into a lynx. But certainly your magic is more remote, she agrees thoughtfully, transforming her hand into a paw and flexing it, much like she did all those years ago when he first was learning the same. The sudden loss of those days sparks in his chest, and he has to look away for a long second to collect himself. Then McGonagall continues, "What have you previously tried?" "I've been focusing on the transformation," says Percy, relieved to be brought firmly back to the present. "Trying to identify the moment where my magic acts as the transformative force, and I become an anchor for the transfiguration." McGonagall hums thoughtfully. "I suppose," she says slowly. A second later, her hand is back to human. "But I would argue that the transformation involves the most amount of magic, and therefore may not be optimal for scrying for your soul, insofar as such an act is possible. I would focus instead on practicing your meditations, the same ones we tried when you were searching for your form." "Why?" Percy asks dubiously. McGonagall gives him a sideways glance, sensing the doubt in his tone. "It is not called the Soul-Seek spell for nothing, Mr. Weasley. Recall our basic animagus theory. Your animagus form is fixed. There has never been a documented case of an animagus form changing, though a patronus is quite the opposite. Thus we conclude that an animagus form displays something core to our sense of self, something immutable. We utilize our magic to provide the transformative force for us to provide these core tenets an animal form, but we do not prescribe the form, we seek knowledge of it, as it already exists within us." "So it's different than the occlumency magic," Percy says, picturing his mental library in his head. "Part of my occlumency shields seem to emerge organically, but part of them are planned, and all are mutable. I must say, I am glad, given your current position, that you did not give up your restricted studies into occlumency," McGonagall says with a sigh, shaking her head. She looks around the room, her attention caught by the smattering of tacked-up articles on the Dark Lord. "Regulus was quite a clever boy," she admits. "I think he would have enjoyed Transfiguration more if Sirius and James were not so clearly talented at the art." "Percy," For all that he knows that McGonagall has worked at Hogwarts for decades, often forgets that she taught all of these names in the history books, and that she attended school with Tom Riddle himself. It throws into sharp contrast Voldemort's bizarre, corrupted form. McGonagall is an older witch, but she is still powerful and likely as knowledgeable in her chosen fields than Tom is in his. Why did he feel so intently he must pursue alternate, almost fabled forms of power rather than merely succeeding in the arenas already available to him? Were you surprised when he joined the Death Eaters? McGonagall purses her wrinkled lips together and looks back at Regulus' desk, the dejection written clearly across the green fabric of her robes as they settle around her thin shoulders. In truth, no, though I of course hoped he may find an alternate path. Nearly all of the talented young Slytherins for a terrible series of years joined the Death Eaters, particularly those that were young heirs with something to prove, or those who were heirs of nothing, like Severus. Severus told me his father was a muggle, says Percy carefully. Yes, and his mother a rather uninspired witch, Merlin rest her soul, Eileen Prince. How she and that muggle produced one of the finest minds of his generation. Severus had to overcome much, McGonagall says quietly, tracing the grain of the wood with her finger. He was an unpleasant boy, but I thought perhaps his friendship with Lily would save him from the Death Eaters, though of course, after he called her a mudblood in front of the entire school, his fate was all but sealed. Lily was not particularly forgiving. It's a wonder she ever forgave James for his relentless teasing of her. I wonder if she would have forgiven Severus in time. Severus had called Lily a mudblood, and in front of the entire school. Do not say that word, Snape's voice echoes in Percy's head, and he flinches again like he had then. And then the horrors of the First War. I was one of the only people who knew Severus was a spy, McGonagall continues, her voice soft, clearly lost in thought. I tried to help him, though of course I was no healer. Luckily, Poppy got involved as well. Severus had no choice but to join the staff. That first year he trembled so much from the after-effects of the Cruciatus that Poppy had him dosed for nearly all his classes. He didn't so much as touch a stirrer for a year after that, though he got all of his students through the owls and newts. McGonagall shakes her head again. He's not a particularly good teacher, but he is determined. Percy can't quite suppress a snort at this, thinking of his own sessions with Severus, where the other man had beat a basic understanding of potions theory into his head through sheer force of will. For the first time, it occurs to Percy that perhaps Severus had an inkling that igniting Percy's competitive spirit, not to mention giving him something to anchor a healthy dose of spite on, would be the correct approach to take with him. The snort seems to break McGonagall out of whatever reverie she mentioned, and Regulus, chair creaks as McGonagall turns again to face him. Try the meditations, she orders him, and the emulsions, if you have the ability to make them. Call your soul back to you, but while you are in your form, so as to satisfy your magical instinct to call your form to you. Percy nods hastily, though the rest of their session is not particularly productive, given that both of their minds are elsewhere, with the same grumpy, irascible man, and the horrors he'd experienced both then and now. January rivals October for Percy's least favorite month of the year. It is so bitterly cold and windy each day. Even layered warming charms are insufficient against the biting chill. Percy endures the weather grumpily and snaps irritably when Julian forgets to cast a warming charm on the tea that he brings Percy each morning. The news of the month is that Death Eaters tried to murder Scrimgeour, apparently. Percy privately has his doubts. Why would he not hear about it if the Dark Lord ordered an attack on Scrimgeour? But he supposes that some may have been acting independently. The attack, nevertheless, rattles Scrimgeour. He creates a detailed plan of succession, commissions an extra 2 Aurors to guard him at all times, and he confides later to Percy he purposely loses the instructions for changing the ministry wards in the Department of Archives. It's filed under Cauldron regulation, Scrimgeour tells Percy in an undertone. Percy has to forcibly hide a smirk. Most boring thing I could think of. At least this way the bastards won't be able to redirect the flu or trigger the anti-apparition wards again. He also tells his Aurors to aim to kill or stun, not merely disarm, when they see a Death Eater, even a suspected one. He passes an emergency decree to authorize his office to use Veritas Room to interrogate prisoners, which Percy feels obliged to point out would bite him if he were to lose power. "I set it to expire once I leave office," he says dismissively to this concern. "We got to get them now, Weasley." The side effect to this decree is that Scrimgeour manages to obtain a fairly accurate list of who all of the marked Death Eaters are. Luckily, Percy has never attended one of the larger gatherings unmasked, but he feels increasingly nervous as the list that Scrimgeour carries around grows with each interrogation. He orders Gringotts to freeze their accounts and organizes searches of their property. As a result, Tom grumbles to him one night, "Malfoy Manor is crawling with rich purebloods with nowhere else to go." This is going to force the Dark Lord's hand, Severus warns. He cannot be stopped. Percy defends himself. He's determined to die with grace, as he puts it. Idiot. The Dark Lord lashes back by burning down half of Diagon Alley, which Percy privately thinks is an idiotic move. Why destroy the society you hope to one day lead? If only there was someone to negotiate with, Scrimgeour grumbles often. Only a fourth, tops, of Percy's attention is concentrated on the ministry. He divides the remainder of his time between continuing to contribute his talent for minutiae, as McGonagall calls it, toward the Order. Unbelievable, the Order does not have even the most basic security measures, like confirming each other's identities when they meet. With researching the wards around Gringotts and the complicated social structure of the goblins, just in case they will need to somehow break in or coerce the goblins into helping him. He practices his animagus meditations at night, curled as a lynx in the center of his bed, but there's still something he's missing, something he can't quite put a finger or a paw on. Lastly, he's begun to examine the life ward he made for Arthur, his father's ill face top of mind. It does not seem to be broken, but considering that Percy basically made up the ritual on the spot, it's surprisingly hard to tell. 3 weeks pass, and his father feels no better. Severus accidentally bumps into him at Grimmauld Place and reports back to Percy. Someone seems to be leeching off his magic. Perhaps at the ministry. I'm investigating it, but I do not see who could be affecting his magic like that. Or why. My father is not a particularly powerful wizard. Tom is useful, as he knows far more about life wards than Percy. Some of his aggression from the previous months seems to bleed away. Instead of pacing angrily back and forth in his portrait like a tiger, he is almost like his 16-year-old self again, content to dive into wild explorations of magical theory with Percy, lobbing lofty insults and revealing his razor-sharp mind. It is as if being around the Dark Lord is a stabilizing influence on Tom. Percy hopes it is not the same for the Dark Lord. "I think in my kingdom you shall be my chief researcher," Tom says to him one chilly evening, the remnants of a laugh still lingering on his lips. Percy sweeps him a low bow. "I would be honored, my lord. Although you are utterly failing to find either of my Horcruxes," the portrait says lightly. "You were too clever in hiding them, my lord. Dumbledore's little order uses the Black family mansion for their meeting place, and Severus searched the place from top to bottom. I believe that you discovered his perfidy and took the locket back. I cannot imagine that someone as insignificant as Regulus Black hid such a large secret from you successfully." Tom looks pensive. "You are likely correct. I will raise it with him. And you guard the Malfoys too well. Severus reports you hardly let either out of your sight, though if we could get in touch with Narcissa, we may be able to utilize her. She is more pragmatic than Lucius." "Abraxas was a fine wizard," Tom says wistfully. "It saddens me that his son disappoints me so, though it sounds as though his grandson is more worthy of his name." Tom is quiet, while Percy bends back over the portrait of his father. The portrait is not truly alive, but it thrums with magic nevertheless, and Percy is trying to run a series of diagnostic spells on the life ward that will reveal something other than that the portrait is made of paint and canvas. "Find me a victim," Tom finally orders. "Someone on whom I can practice my possession. I grow tired of waiting, Percy. I can find my Horcruxes myself if I had a body." Percy freezes very slowly, like ice creeping up a fountain as a Dementor glides past. "A victim. At least a half-blood, preferably. One that is not too important. I may kill him the first time, which is why I shan't risk you. That should be simple for you, wouldn't it?" I am watched very carefully, both by the minister and by yourself, my lord. Percy attempts to demur. I cannot be seen killing half-bloods. Tom waves his hand. He can be a pathetic half-blood, one that nobody misses. The body matters not. It is merely a vessel. I will provide the power. Percy bites his lower lip, but he has no choice but to say yes, does he? We must destroy the portrait, Severus writes later that night, when Percy updates him on Tom's demand. We still do not know the fifth or sixth Horcrux. We do not know that the portrait knows either. He has confirmed the locket and the cup. Perhaps we can make another portrait once we obtain one of the two. Just give me some more time to talk to him. Tom, do you think Regulus would have deeded the locket to somebody? Do you have any family heirlooms? What would you have done? I will not die, says Tom simply, so I need not concern myself with wills and the like. But it is a good idea to check with the black line of heritage, particularly if the black boy knew he would soon die. Percy takes a bite of his meal. I wish I had family heirlooms, he says longingly. The best I have is an ugly old goblin tiara. I bet the Gaunt family has fantastic items full of magic and history and power. I bet you have one of the lowest Gringotts vaults. Tom smiles serenely. The Gaunt family is one of the oldest, but I admit I was never particularly interested in the vault, he says, which Percy instinctively takes to mean that he did not know of the vault's existence. I prefer to create my own heirlooms. You never thought to use the founder's artifacts for their own power. Why do I need their power when I have mine? By February, his father is in bed nearly all of the time, and he summons his three eldest sons to his side. Even Charlie flews in from Romania, clutching a letter penned in their father's shaky hands. Percy risks it to attend the meeting as well, figuring he will be able to explain it if he really needs to do so. The healers believe I have under a year remaining, Arthur tells them somberly. Bill sniffs hard at the news, his eyes already red-rimmed and brimming with tears. Charlie is more composed, but he leans his broad shoulders into Percy and says nothing. I do not wish to tell your younger siblings yet. There is truly nothing we can do, Charlie asks, his voice steady. My magic is failing me, their father says, looking down at his hands. But do not mourn me, boys. I had a good life, a happy life, and if I must die after helping to bring down you-know-who, then I am proud of my death. Bill leans forward and grips Arthur's hand tightly. We will make you proud, Dad, he vows, voice thick with tears. Percy does not feel mournful. He feels angry, cheated, and entirely unwilling to give up. I'm looking into it, he snaps. Magic does not just turn on you, father. There must be a reason. Oh, Percy, Arthur sighs. Sometimes life has no reason. That is what makes it so delightful and so challenging. Later, the three brothers sit in the darkened living room, not meeting each other's eyes. I can't believe it, says Bill for the 11th time, shaking his head. You know your parents will die one day, but it seems so soon. He never should have joined the order, Charlie says darkly. Good was it to guard the prophecy anyway. I read in the prophet it was stolen from the hall anyway during the night of the Dementors. Dumbledore should have protected him, contributes Percy in agreement. Charlie runs a hand through his short, curly hair and looks to Percy. I want to help. With what? With anything. I know you're in the thick of it, Percy. Charlie leans forward. If Dad's going to die for this order, then I want to make sure it was worth it. Let's bring the bastard down. Bill shifts uncomfortably, whether at the insinuation that Percy is more in the thick of it than him, or at the hoarse, angry tenor to Charlie's voice, but does not interrupt. Percy has been too busy to stage a dramatic conflict with his family, though he will probably have to do it soon. His younger siblings seem content to believe he has turned entirely to the dark side, but his older brothers still regard him with a measure of trust. Charlie is powerful at magic, but no more than Bill and certainly not Percy. He does not have too many useful contacts, at least in Britain. Abroad, however, and Charlie can fly. Percy thinks about it for a long minute and then nods decisively. If I were part of the Order, and I have no plans to join the Order, I would want to evacuate as many people as possible, he says carefully. I would perhaps consider that the Dark Lord will begin the purges as soon as he takes over the ministry, and by the looks of it, he's getting impatient. Britain may not be safe for them. Why won't you join the bloody Order? Bill asks in frustration. We're all in it. I cannot join anything run by Dumbledore so openly, Percy says truthfully. But if I were in it, I would perhaps reach out to McGonagall. Charlie nods slowly, repeatedly, as the idea warms to him. We can take them by broom, he says, portkeys. Not the flu, I reckon. Nothing that can be traced. Maybe even muggle transport. I'll help, says Bill. I've been feeling useless. Ron's somehow in the thick of it, and Fred and George are making all those shielding cloaks and eavesdropping lines. Fleur's been telling me that she's been reaching out to the Vila community, trying to drum up some support, but they don't want to fight. Maybe they'll take in some refugees. Charlie and Percy exchange a look. And who is Fleur? Charlie asks, dragging the name out playfully. Bill flushes a deep crimson. My girlfriend. Well, soon-to-be fiancée, but you lads can't mention it to anyone. After tonight, I do not think I will see you both again for a very long time, Percy says quietly. He looks up and meets their eyes, one set at a time. Do not think the worst of me as this year continues, but continue to think quite poorly of me. Do you understand? Charlie looks confused, but Bill nods steadily at him. I'll loudly proclaim how much I hate you if that helps, and you shan't be invited to the wedding. Although with Dad so ill, maybe we should try and have the wedding sooner. Although I have to ask Fleur first, but I can't imagine she'll say no. Percy shakes his head decisively. Dad's not going to die, Bill, not yet. I won't let him. Death is on everyone's mind, it seems. Severus tells Percy tiredly that Dumbledore has begun to plan in earnest for his death, though Severus has been unable to get Draco to trust him enough to confide his plan for breaking into Hogwarts. Given that Percy knows only the date, and not the method, he feels a bit guilty that Severus has to play these games with Draco. The boy's taught himself enough occlumency that I can't just break into his mind, Severus grumbles, during one of the rare times they're able to coordinate a meeting at headquarters. Percy winces again from his position on Regulus' bed. That was most likely his fault too. Albus has assembled his will and left me instructions to remain headmaster of Hogwarts under any means necessary. He's been giving Potter private lessons all year, though he won't share with me what he's sharing with him. Probably news of the Horcruxes, says Percy thoughtfully. Then, so Dumbledore seems properly convinced he's going to have to die. He's given me a copy of his will and informed me that I will be able to communicate with his portrait after he dies, Severus confirms, giving Percy a look out of the corner of his eyes. You thought he may be trying to avoid death. Let me assure you that not even Albus Dumbledore will be able to escape the fatal effects of the cursed ring he placed on his finger, nor the effect of my unbreakable vow. No, Albus will die, and soon. Well, it's just, Percy begins, and then stops short as something occurs to him. He'd assumed that Dumbledore was collecting the Hallows for his own use, but perhaps Dumbledore had something else in mind. Power the Dark Lord knows not. He's going to give Harry the Deathly Hallows, breathes Percy, his eyes wide, in the hopes that they'll keep Harry alive long enough to count. I've examined Dumbledore's wand when I was able, Severus says slowly. It is indeed made of elder wood, though I do not take that to be definitive proof that it is the wand in the legends. Nor do I think we can assume that the Hallows do confer immortality. The Hallows are meant to allow the owner to cheat death, but not necessarily evade it forever. All three brothers die, but perhaps they will allow Harry to cheat death just long enough to fulfill the prophecy, Percy points out, or at least give him a fighting chance. There was a period at the Battle of Hogwarts where Harry feigned death, you know. Hagrid carried him in, and we all thought he was dead, and then he leaped out of Hagrid's arms as right as rain. Perhaps the Deathly Hallows allow you to imitate death. Like the draft of living death, but a controlled ability, muses Severus, which Percy knows means that Severus is taking his suggestions seriously. It could be, I suppose. I suppose this means I will need to let Potter defeat me in a duel. Perhaps that is what kills me in the end, given I do not think the Dark Lord will keep me alive if I allowed Potter to best me. Percy waves aside this sardonic comment. But maybe Draco can get the wand, he says thoughtfully. Harry can certainly beat Draco in a duel, or at least have more of a fighting chance. If you dueled him, chances are that you'd have to let him win, and that wouldn't be a true victory. Severus waves this aside. We cannot fall into conjecture, as we do not know very much about the Hallows. I wanted to speak to you about the stone while we had the time. Have you figured out how to make the elixir of immortality? Perhaps when this is all over, Percy will figure out one of the myriad of ways to make himself immortal. Hallows, Horcruxes, and Philosopher's Stones. It's a wonder that immortality is not more common in the wizarding world. Although, as he thinks about living through his life again, he cannot quite say if to be immortal would be a luxury or a burden. Severus shakes his head, some of his lanky hair falling into his face. I do not believe the elixir of immortality exists. I have been examining the potions theory carefully. The stone does not have many of the requisite properties to confer immortality or even prolonged age. Percy blinks, taken aback. Really, but Nicholas Flamel is still alive. Severus nods slowly, as if considering his next words carefully. I believe that may be a falsehood perpetuated by Flamel or his descendants. Oh, Percy leans back on the bed, feeling curiously disheartened. Yes. Severus pushes his hair out of his face and then turns to look at Percy. Percy, you know that I will almost certainly die in under 2 years' time. Percy's body tenses before he can stop it, the blankets rustling loudly underneath his legs. You don't know that, Severus. For all of our interventions in the timeline, much is occurring on schedule, Severus says carefully. Have achieved great progress, and I believe if we continue, we stand to defeat the Dark Lord without incurring as heavy bloodshed as we did in your original timeline. But Albus still brought death upon himself, and we could not have prevented it. I saved Cedric, says Percy, stubbornly. Cedric Diggory is far less important to the Dark Lord than I. Severus makes a gesture, as if to stand and cross to Percy, and then settles himself back in his chair. I believe I see how it will happen. I will murder Albus, since Draco will not be able to stomach it. You saw his initiation. He could not even kill a stranger, let alone his headmaster. The Dark Lord will grow jealous or suspicious of me, particularly once I am installed as the headmaster of Hogwarts, his preferred area to control. But you said he asked you to kill Dumbledore, and one day he will either learn of the Elder Wand and kill me for it, or he'll find I am too powerful and kill me to prevent me from challenging him, or he will order me to do something I am unwilling to do and kill me for refusing. In truth, I never expected to live out the rest of this war, Weasley, even before you came along. Percy stands, shaking his head. The thought of Severus dying after all of this, and because Tom is too jealous or insecure or stubborn to allow Severus to exist alive in the same universe as him, and because Percy can't keep Severus bloody well alive, like he couldn't keep Fred, and he can't keep his dad, and Merlin knows who else he can't keep alive. Shut up, Severus. Could you kill him? If you had to, Myrtle asks, floating in front of him, and Percy does not meet her gaze. Weasley, says Severus, and there is pity in the even way he says the syllables. You ought not to mourn me. Just shut up, Percy says savagely. He pushes himself off the bed, takes 3 quick steps to the desk, where he has a tremendous urge to punch Severus in his sallow, hopeless face, and scoops up the bundle of gold that Severus had brought for him. You're not allowed to die and leave me here alone. Do you understand that? I won't let you. Percy, starts Severus, and his goddamn sympathy is too much for Percy to bear, and he apparats himself roughly away. He regrets it, of course he does, standing in the middle of his flat, the portrait on his wall empty, and the portrait of his father looking up at him curiously without a spark of intelligence in his painted blue eyes. He regrets it, but he does not go back, at least not until his chest has stopped heaving, and his eyes have stopped stinging with unshed tears. But by the time Percy sheepishly apparats back into Regulus' room, it is long empty, with a smattering of dust over all of the surfaces, thoughtfully cast by Severus to mask the fact that either of them were ever there. Somehow, solving this mystery of why the room is so perpetually grimy does not bring Percy any relief. Once upon a time, Percy confiscated a series of suspicious-looking trinkets from Neville Longbottom, increasingly noxious and dangerous ingredients hastily spelled together by various enterprising Hogwarts students, or perhaps Hogsmeade vendors. Percy had not asked how Neville had obtained them at the time. Now, the types of things that Percy uses to try and induce a successful meditation in his Lynx form would put Neville to shame. He tries all the normal infusions, lizard's blood and diluted doxy venom, various mushrooms with unpronounceable names and lurid yellow spots, ground crystals and damp moss gently collected from the base of large oak trees, precisely at midnight. But none of them still the racing thoughts in his head and the erratic beating of his heart, made all the worse by his lynx form, which does not enjoy sitting placidly in his bed where there is danger lurking at every corner. He winds up vomiting into his toilet more than once, barely able to make it back to his human form before he curls himself raggedly against the cool porcelain toilet. His mirror has long since been spelled silent, so there is no sound in his bathroom except for his hoarse breaths and the soft drip of sweat as it drops from his forehead onto the tiled floor. But Percy would not be Percy Weasley if he were not determined. He would not be Percy Weasley if he were scared of a few potions' ingredients and the great unknown. He twisted himself back through time, not once, but twice. He has the Dark Lord's mark branded on his skin, whispering to him, sometimes, in the middle of the night when he cannot sleep, and an apprenticeship offer from Minerva McGonagall. He knows everything he could conceivably have learned about soul magic, and he will find his own soul if it kills him. No Patronus, Percy. Tom asks slyly, and Percy bares his teeth in rage. He stopped trying. Perhaps his soul is too dark now. Perhaps he went right ahead and ripped his soul in half with the two deaths that weigh on his conscience, and that is why he cannot seek his soul, why he cannot call it to him like his magic. Perhaps he's nearly killed himself, and not even made any Horcruxes out of the process. He can see the appeal sometimes. If he has to kill, he might as well eke a measure of protection out of the process, right? The problem is that he can't figure out how to not use his magic. Much like his second first year, where even saying the spells obediently with the rest of the class caused the feather on his desk to flutter, Percy feels his magic in everything he does. It sparks around his fingers and curls lazily in the curve of his shoulder and nestles in the joints of his long, lanky legs. He feels his magic in every breath he takes, in every heartbeat that carries blood through his body. Even as a lynx, he feels it, sitting behind the nape of his neck, ready to be called on if needed to bring him back to human form. He feels his magic when he walks around in the ministry, feels it assess the magic of everyone he passes, feels it asserting dominance quietly, insidiously, carefully, just as Tom taught him. But Percy's not sure that he's ever felt his soul, except that he feels that damned something existing somewhere in the space between his magic and his self. Unless it's all in his head, and he's all but gone crazy, which seems more plausible with every passing day. March 1997, facing the Dark Lord never seems to get easier. Percy tries to breathe slowly and evenly, but he feels what he's begun to recognize as the physical manifestations of his reaction to the Dark Lord's magic. Sweat prickling down his back, a dry, unbrushed taste in his mouth, and of course that inexorable hum of tainted elemental magic ringing in his ears. The Dark Lord is not happy, which means that he's crucioed more than one Death Eater already, most recently the newly freed Lucius Malfoy, based on yet another disappointing letter for Draco. Percy watches Lucius pant on the floor, his long silver locks matted, and reflects that for Lucius probably the greater shame is that the entire outer circle of Death Eaters, now numbering 52, including 13 marked with one of Percy's circlets, heard the Dark Lord read out Draco's letter in a mocking tone. Why the Dark Lord himself cannot enter Hogwarts, why the Dark Lord himself has participated in no Muggle torture after Samhain, why the Dark Lord himself has nothing to update, are all questions that nobody dares to even think. Thinking too loudly in the presence of the Dark Lord can literally be death-defying. Percy carefully turns his attention over to an admiration of Malfoy Manor, of the great chandelier hanging above. He used to try to diplomatically admire the snake, but knowing now that Nagini may be killing his father, he cannot bring himself to even look at the wretched thing. "We will take the ministry the month after we take Hogwarts," Voldemort says, finally tiring of the horse, choked where Lucius tries to muffle his screams. "We will need volunteers." Instantly, a low murmur breaks out. Percy stays quiet, watching how the inner circle reacts. Their faces remain carefully impassive. They had known this was the plan. Percy had not known this was the plan, had Severus. Percy does not do anything as stupid as look to Severus for confirmation, but he resolves to ask the other man about it later. Their relationship has been strained of late. Every time Percy thinks of his reaction to Severus, calm foretelling of his death, he wants to flush with shame. Whose, of course, will be our minister, though he does not yet know it, Voldemort announces to a general round of chuckles, and Percival will be his captor. Percy becomes uncomfortably aware of everyone's attention on him. He swallows and crawls forward, his knees aching. "My lord, Percival, dear Percival," the Dark Lord says tenderly. "It has been months, and you have waited so patiently to show your worth after such a promising start. Perhaps you thought I have not noticed that you do not participate in the fun and games that your fellow Death Eaters so enjoy." "I apologize, my lord," Percy says nervously. So the Dark Lord had noticed his departure at Samhain. Perhaps this is his way of punishing Percy, though Percy notes the covetous way that Yaxley looks at him and thinks that some of the Death Eaters may think it some sort of reward. "Perhaps you thought they were beneath you." "No, my lord, Crucio," says the Dark Lord, and for several agonizing seconds Percy feels his bones crunch into dust and then reknit themselves forcefully, again and again, until he feels his very self to be a burning pile of ash on the floor. The curse stops abruptly, and Percy becomes aware that he is sobbing quietly. He does not have enough experience with the Cruciatus to try and moderate his response, like some of the more seasoned Death Eaters. Each time the pain is a new type of torture. Each time it takes him multiple throbbing heartbeats to come back to himself when the curse is over. "Now, Percival, I know you do not like bloodshed, but you should not be shy to volunteer your talents elsewhere. You will watch Pews, and you will maintain the Imperius on him, and you will take your orders directly from Lucius, unless Lucius continues to disappoint me, and then you will take your orders from Yaxley." In the corner of his mind that has begun to recover from the curse, Percy notes the way Yaxley inadvertently flicks a hungry gaze toward Lucius. Lucius will have to guard his back carefully, now that Yaxley has been publicly told exactly who is preventing him from ascending the ranks. For that matter, so will Percy. Percy has a theory that the Dark Lord torments, yet trusts, Lucius so often because of his fondness for Abraxas and disappointment in Lucius. Tom enjoys hearing tales of Lucius' failures. They seem to bring him a sense of triumph paired with sorrow. Thinking of Tom in his living room, unable to hide his eagerness for Percy's stories, helps Percy to crawl back to his knees, some of the fear receding, though the pain lingers. He has to be funny. Tom likes wit, and from the mocking and dryly sardonic speech pattern that the Dark Lord uses in these types of events, Percy gets the feeling that even Voldemort is experiencing a dearth of humor. "This is a great honor, my lord," he says, touching his forehead to the ground. "Although I do believe the ministry will allow itself to be taken without a single Imperius. A single interdepartmental memo announcing the regime change should suffice." Percy feels the men closest to him shift uncomfortably, but Voldemort's smile splits his lipless mouth, and his high laugh echoes around the room. "Nevertheless, you will take the necessary precautions. Our power must be absolute, our supremacy unchallenged." The Dark Lord sounds more reasonable lately, Percy realizes with a large lurch of his stomach. He's clearly begun to plan. Even his demeanor has become more familiar, more like Tom. Perhaps he made another Horcrux. No, that would hardly make him more stable. Whatever rituals he's completing in the secrecy of the Master Suite at Malfoy Manor, Percy would love to hear what Lucius has to say about that. Seem to be compensating for the corrupted blood and bone ritual. Voldemort becoming saner and more reasonable is decidedly not a good sign. When Percy belatedly learns that Draco Malfoy nearly killed Ron, he barely manages to avoid storming into the castle and strangling the little snake himself. He already has one wizard to kill, and a formidable one at that. Why is he bothering to continue petty schoolboy rivalries when his mother's life hangs by a thread? "A poisoned bottle of mead," Percy complains to Tom, pacing back and forth in front of the painting. "Mead, given to the potions professor anonymously. A professor, I might add, known for his greed and penchant for hosting private little parties. What an idiot Draco is." "Perhaps the bottle was meant for Dumbledore," muses Tom. He will not be amused to hear of this latest attempt. The necklace was ludicrous enough. Percy scoffs. Draco's just grasping at straws. Slughorn would never have given that bottle to Dumbledore. "But he did give it to your underage brother," Tom observes wryly. "Slughorn is still at Hogwarts. I thought Snape was the potions professor." "Snape is teaching defense this year." Percy suddenly remembers what Harry had told him about Dumbledore recruiting Slughorn for some unspecified reason and tries to divert Tom's suspicion. Slughorn begged for the position, apparently. He's dead frightened. The Death Eaters are coming for his blood. Did he offend you? Not at all, says Tom thoughtfully. On the contrary, Slughorn was my favorite professor. The Slytherin head of house, too. So openly self-serving, of course, it was rather couth. But to his credit, he tried to help the Slug Club achieve their goals without prejudice, hoping to ride on their coattails to success. Percy notes the Muggle expression in the midst of wondering whether Slughorn would have recruited him to his little club. Likely when Tom says without prejudice, he means that Slughorn condoned dark magic, rather than meaning that he included Muggle-borns, although Tom was a half-blood at a time when it was even less acceptable to be a half-blood as it is now, so perhaps he does mean the latter. Percy tries for a joke. And what goals of yours did he help with? World domination. Tom chuckles. Nearly. He told me about Horcruxes, you know. Of course, I knew what that were already, but I wanted confirmation that they were more than merely myths. Slughorn. He must be more interesting than I thought, Percy comments, trying to hide his surprise that a Hogwarts professor, even the head of Slytherin House, would tell a student about Horcruxes, but perhaps times were different then, during Grindelwald's reign. Percy has the uncomfortable thought that perhaps Slughorn was to Tom as McGonagall was to him, which makes him feel funny for a reason he cannot quite articulate. Perhaps he was intentionally trying to poison Harry Potter then, and accidentally got my fool brother. Slughorn would be a good recruit. He knows nearly everyone after all. It makes more sense than him suddenly fearing for his life from the Death Eaters. He ought to know I wouldn't kill him, not unless he stops being helpful. Dumbledore must be trying to get that information from Slughorn. But why? Does he truly not know that Tom made Horcruxes? Is he more behind in the process than they had thought? Perhaps he had not lied to Severus about not being certain about what precisely Tom did to stay alive, which would mean that perhaps they had been premature in assuming collaborating with Dumbledore would be counterproductive. Percy does not like to think that he made a mistake. He swallows heavily. Snape's the defense professor. Tom continues, not noticing Percy's inner turmoil. Perhaps Dumbledore wanted more from Slughorn. Maybe Slughorn did help Tom with creating the Horcruxes, or knows the secret of what they are, and that is what Dumbledore wants from the man. How can Percy get access to Slughorn? Would he respond to an owl? Sorry, Percy asks when he realizes Tom is waiting for something. Snape is the new defense professor, Tom says impatiently. You should warn him. There's a curse on the position. I cursed the contract when Dumbledore refused to let me teach, the prejudiced fool. I would have been an excellent professor. Will Snape die? Tom shrugs. I was not very specific, but he shall only be able to teach for a single year. Well, if Draco or Snape kills Dumbledore according to plan, then I doubt he intends to teach again. Percy pauses and then adds, Tom, how can I get to know Slughorn? Jealous, are we? Tom says mockingly, a strange little smile playing on his pale, painted lips. You want to be in the precious Slug Club. Slughorn is almost certainly working with the Death Eaters, Percy snaps back. And I have no connections of my own, or have you forgotten my family is an embarrassment to wizard kind? I need allies, and I'm not ashamed to say it. Tom chuckles. Well, you have the new Dark Lord as an ally to start, not to mention that Snape seems rather fond of you, but if you feel you must cultivate Slughorn, I won't disagree. He's quite useful. Bring him crystallized pineapple. He loves it. A few days later, Percy tastes some of the crystallized pineapple that he purchases via owl order and blanches, spitting it out. Hermes snaps it up eagerly and cocks his head, waiting for more. Don't eat that, Hermes, Percy scolds him, summoning a nutritious owl treat from his cupboard instead. It's nearly entirely sugar. Neither of us should eat it. Tom snickers from the other room. The sweeter the better for old Sluggy. Percy meets Slughorn in the Three Broomsticks. It is a tad more public than he'd prefer, but he thinks he can justify meeting Slughorn to the Dark Lord, particularly when the man accidentally poisoned Percy's younger brother. Percival Weasley Pruett, Slughorn says jovially when Percy locates him in the back of the pub. Unfortunately, all three members of the trio are also there, but Ron is so fixated on the sight of Ginny snogging some boy, Percy averts his gaze politely, unlike Ron, who stares intently, that he hopes to pass by unseen. Slughorn is already tipsy. Percy pushes across the candied pineapple and tries to smile winsomely. Very honored to make your acquaintance, Professor. Yours as well. I've heard nothing but good things, boy, nothing but good things. Although I must say, young Harry Potter may be usurping you for best potion student. Even Severus has to admit the boy's got genius. Slughorn chuckles to himself, his greedy fingers reaching for the sweets and popping one into his mouth, leaving some crystallized sugar on his mustache. Percy very narrowly resists the urge to turn and glare at Harry. Harry Potter, good at potions. Percy knows Harry well enough to know that he makes only a token effort at his classes, defense being the notable exception, and even in that case he primarily succeeds at the practicals rather than the theory. Well, transfiguration was always where my passions lay, Percy says politely. I love potions, but I fear I do not have the natural talent for it. Yes, I heard Minerva offered you an apprenticeship. I must say, boy, and I say this out of genuine concern for your career, you really ought to reconsider turning down the opportunity. Particularly with these turbulent times, it might be safer to ride them out in Hogwarts, and an apprenticeship offer from Minerva McGonagall is rare indeed. Well, I am senior assistant to the minister, Percy says, a tad coolly. Soon to be junior undersecretary. Slughorn raises his thick, bushy eyebrows and takes a hearty swig from his tankard, draining the rest of the foam in one large gulp. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, I see. Very good, very good. So, what can I do for you? Percy readies himself for the confrontation, checking that his wards are active and humming with energy. He reaches out with his magic as an extra precaution, but his magic only brushes against the students in the room and a few token adult wizards sipping on their drinks in the corner. Sir, I must ask you something as head of Slytherin House, as well as someone that surely knows everyone, and therefore has a very good idea of what is coming. Percy leans forward, his tone low and urgent, hoping to impress upon Slughorn the seriousness of his words, and to block the man's reaction from the people sitting behind Percy, should they look up. Slughorn unconsciously leans in too. Percy wrinkles his nose at the smell of butterbeer that wafts from his bulbous face, sweet and cloying. I have come to the attention of Tom Riddle. You know of whom I speak, I presume. Slughorn's face shuts down immediately, and he pulls back as if shocked. I cannot say I want to hear any more. Please, Professor, I've no one else to ask this kind of question. Percy gives him a pleading look. Riddle isn't the type of man you say no to, not unless you have a good reason. You taught him, didn't you? Slughorn nods slowly, his eyes darting around for an escape. Yes, many years ago, but it would be a mistake to say I knew him well. I don't know what to do, Percy says, widening his eyes desperately. Time to pry. Professor. If he's going to succeed, if he's not going to be stopped. I should join him, shouldn't I? Better to join now willingly than by force later on. Tom is very powerful, Slughorn confirms, his voice sinking into a quiet murmur. Very determined. Professor, if he thinks fondly of you, he might recruit you too. Are you going to turn him down? I am no killer, Mr. Weasley Prowett, Slughorn whispers harshly. I cannot join him. I cannot condone what he does. He's not human. He does not share our morals. But if Dumbledore is defeated, we'll have no choice, will we? Percy insists. I've heard rumors that Tom cannot die. What hope do we have against someone who can't die? Slughorn swallows roughly, his eyes darting around him in panic, only now thinking to raise a privacy charm. But Dumbledore thinks Potter can defeat him. Do you truly believe that, sir? Slughorn swallows again, his Adam's apple bobbing furiously in his fleshy throat. The rumors are true. If Tom cannot die, then only one blessed by prophecy will be able to defeat him. Percy decides to take a risk, adding another layer to his privacy charms so that an eavesdropper would not even be able to read their lips. Sir, has Dumbledore mentioned the word Horcrux to you? Slughorn's face, already pale, whitens until he looks nearly like a ghost. My boy, where did you hear that word? Tom has them, Percy reveals, looking as intently as he can at Slughorn. Multiple, I think. 7, Slughorn whispers to himself. He looks as though he is reliving a memory, and Percy allows him to finish it without interruption. When he turns his gaze back to Percy, there is fear growing in his eyes. You know of this. I believe one of Tom's enemies tried to destroy them, but he left no trace of his success, Percy says, finally getting to the real reason he'd set up a meeting with Slughorn. Professor, do you know how I can track whether they have been destroyed? Is there a way to measure how much of one's soul is remaining? I worry that Tom is making more, and we'll never be certain that we got them all. We'll live in fear, even if he seems to be destroyed, that he'll return decades later in a new form. I must think. Slughorn raises his tankard with a trembling hand, but sets it down with a clank when he realizes it is already empty. The situation is worse than I'd thought. I did not know he succeeded. I think Dumbledore brought you to Hogwarts for this information. Professor, you should give it to him if you've not already. He will think so poorly of me. Tell him that you know Tom made a Horcrux, Percy says urgently. Or tell Harry. He is just a boy. He will not judge you harshly. Slughorn swallows again. His eyes flick over Percy's shoulder, presumably to where Harry is sitting. So young for such a burden, he says again to himself, before turning his attention to Percy. Well, think on your question. I've been trying to work with a Dementor, Percy says recklessly, but I don't know if it's going to work. A Dementor? Slughorn hisses, his face paling further. My boy, you will come to ruin. You ought to forget you ever heard the name Tom Riddle. Percy can't help it. He snorts, and more loudly than he means. That's really not an option for me, Professor, nor for any of us if things continue the way they do. Tom will kill you, Slughorn whispers hoarsely. Mr. Weasley, he will not show mercy. Won't I? Whispers Tom. He will not show any of us mercy, given the chance, says Percy coolly, standing and looking down at Slughorn disdainfully. He can't imagine Tom thinking of Slughorn like how Percy thinks of McGonagall, but then again, it would be out of character for Tom to hold a professor in such high esteem. Perhaps the idea of Tom looking up to Slughorn had been what turned Percy's stomach so uncomfortably at the thought. I'll come back in a few months. Look out for my owl. Percy faintly recalls that Slughorn remains on at Hogwarts to teach during the final year of Voldemort's reign. He wasn't killed, and Harry destroyed the Horcruxes, so he presumably gave Harry the information he sought without burning any bridges with Voldemort. If he worked up the courage once in his miserable little self, he can do it again. On the way out, Percy lingers in a dark corner, pretending to duck into the loo before casting a disillusionment charm. Hidden, he watches Ginny laughing with her boyfriend, Harry and Ron watching her intently, though presumably for different reasons, and Hermione flushing red when Ron gracelessly touches her mouth to indicate where she has butterbeer foam. They are all so young, so concerned with their relationships despite the looming threat. The rest of Britain has begun rationing their happiness like white sugar for their tea, looking over their shoulders for the chilled, misty breath of a Dementor, holding their loved ones tightly in bed at night. They're burying silver coins in their gardens and tying bundles of herbs at their fence posts. They know what the ministry tried to deny for too long. War is coming, and they will be the first to be sacrificed. But here at Hogwarts, the students seem to not understand, though their last few years have been fraught with peril. Even Harry is able to do something as ordinary as fall for his friend's younger sister. Is it because he does not know the prophecy? Will Percy have to tell it to him? Will that awful burden fall to him in this timeline to ensure the chosen one understands his task? Is it only Percy that cannot rid his mind of the burden of prescience, of understanding precisely what is to come? He has knowledge of the future, of course, but even in the first timeline, he had seen some version of what was to come and prepared himself accordingly. Had Harry died, had he failed, Percy would have been perfectly positioned to take a respectable position in the Dark Lord's kingdom. He may have been able to use that influence to save the lives of his family, all of whom recklessly, and with no regard to the alternative, branded themselves defiantly as traitors. He'd dated Penny for 16 months. In that time, they'd slept together a dozen times at most. He never contemplated marriage. He'd never introduced her to his family. He'd never included her to his private thoughts, as wild and tormented as they were. He had dated her because he'd admired her, because she'd liked him, and he'd said goodbye to her with a small sting in his heart that was utterly dwarfed by the terror he felt every day. Even before the war, he'd never been so careless, so free, so childish. Percy sighs and begins to leave. Perhaps after the war, if he's still alive, he can try to recapture some of his long-lost youth, or he'll die, and it'll be a moot point entirely. Percy would have expected Tom to interrogate him about his meeting with Slughorn, and he prepared a series of lies accordingly. But Tom isn't there when he returns from Hogsmeade, and he spends the night away too, doing Merlin knows what with the Dark Lord. It makes Percy uneasy. Tom is unpredictable after his time with Voldemort, liable to be angry or arrogant, depending on whether he is pleased by what he sees in Malfoy Manor. So when Tom reappears the next morning, as Percy is eating breakfast, Percy tenses instinctively over his bowl of cornflakes. His eyes flick to Tom, and he sets his spoon down cautiously. Tom's agitation is written all over the way his painted clothes crease over his frame, how Tom paces toward the boundaries of the canvas, as if to step right off and into the room with Percy. Not a good night with the Dark Lord, then. Whether that means the Dark Lord has become more or less powerful remains to be seen. Why have you not progressed? Tom snarls at him without an introduction. Voldemort must be getting stronger then, and not in a manner that Tom approves of, given the flaring of the portrait's nostrils. Tom, Percy begins, his tone conciliatory, hoping to cut off Tom's cloud of anger before it billows into a thunderstorm. What insipid excuse will you have for me now? Tom does not reach openly for his wand, but his long, pale fingers flex by his side, as if he wants to strangle Percy. Percy swallows. He does not know what Voldemort must have done to rattle Tom so deeply, but he can be sure it is nothing good. Maybe Voldemort has finally made another Horcrux, or perhaps one of those elemental rituals he's been trying so desperately actually succeeded. Tom, you've been working with me this whole time, objects Percy defensively. You've seen how hard I've been working. He knows immediately it's the wrong thing to say. Tom laughs, and not kindly, the harsh sound so different from Tom's usual velvet tones. You've been spending more time worrying about your pathetic excuse for a father than helping me. Here Tom's voice turns sly and unpleasant at Percy involuntarily looks at his father's portrait, leaning against the wall opposite to Tom. Unless you've been lying to me this whole time. Unless you don't want me to come back. Is that what's holding you back, Percy? Tom, you know that's not true. Percy hesitates and blurts out, I've recruited Andromeda Black. She's reached out to Narcissa Malfoy. We're trying to get into the Black family vault. Even this revelation, as ill-advised as it may have been for Percy to say, doesn't slow Tom. Tom paces back and forth like a caged beast, his robes swirling around him. Percy can feel Tom's magic building, a low level of static electricity in his flat that sparks discordantly against his own magic and sends prickles down Percy's spine. Tom has been growing stronger, Percy realizes, though he can only hope the canvas continues to contain him. I've seen you perform far more capable feats of magic than convincing one silly woman to let you into her vault, hisses Tom. I taught you the Imperius myself, or didn't you tell me that? Oh no, Percy. I know what you're capable of when you're motivated. Percy had considered just enchanting Narcissa, but he'd kept it aside as a last resort, given that he isn't sure if he could hide such a thing from the Dark Lord or from Narcissa's sister. Tom, so perhaps what I need to do is motivate you. Tom, Percy begins, half rising from behind his desk. I do not want any more excuses. Tom roars in anger, thrusting out his hand as if to cast a wandless spell, 3 fingers on his left hand curled over his right shoulder. Percy feels like he may have recognized the sign, but he can't dwell on it. 2 things happen in short succession. Tom's eyes flare red, and Percy's diagnostic charm on the portrait of his father twangs urgently. Tom, Percy says very slowly, still crouched over his chair, one hand supporting him on the wooden desk. It feels like if he were to move, Tom may leap out of the portrait and strike him down. Tom, don't do anything reckless. I've been nothing but patient, Tom hisses disgustedly. I have watched your ineptitude and hoped you would not let me down, but at last I must take matters into my own hands. The charm twangs again. Percy straightens up, points his wand at Tom's portrait and says as calmly as he can, What are you doing, Tom? Your father's dying, isn't he? Tom says tauntingly. His magic is failing and nobody knows why. Tom. I can go into his portrait, you know. And suddenly Percy stifles a cry as Tom appears like magic in the frame on the opposite wall. His father looks at Tom curiously, and Tom reaches out and strokes one long finger down Arthur's face. I can feel his magic. Tom, stop it, Percy orders, the pieces of the puzzle slotting together with an abrasive clang. I'm so close to the locket. Tom, please. Tom, please, Tom mimics nastily, his finger still on Arthur's face. Your father's dying, Percy, and there's nothing you can do. Wouldn't you want his death to be for good? He'll bring me back, and then you won't have to worry about finding the locket. I'll stop you, he says desperately. Tom, please. You couldn't stop me if you tried, Tom says tauntingly, and then thrusts his hand out again in the same motion, his fingers bent grotesquely like claws. Percy's charms chime with 1,000 bells, each more panicky than the next, the sound filling his ears until he drops to his knees next to his desk. The magic swells and gathers, blowing through the flat, and Percy screams as the icy feel of Tom's magic slices through his shields as if they were insubstantial. He crawls across the floor, his knees brushing painfully against the sharp bristles of his rug. Out of his blurry eyes, he can see his father's painted face twisted into a scream of agony. Let me in. Percy howls, gathering his magic and sending it through the clamor to the portrait. I created you, both of you, and you will let me in now. He forces his will into the layers of paint and canvas and wooden frame, calls upon his magic like he'd twice before, once to force the Marauder's map to give up his secrets, and once to force a simple map of London to show him the history of Tom Riddle. He'd conquered those, and he'll conquer these now. The portrait struggles against him, but in the end it recognizes his magic and falls silent, dormant, allowing his dominance. With a flash he's inside, he feels Tom, he feels his father, and the three vines of their magic flow and twist together. Percy's arm is burning, Tom's magic is flaring, but his father is fighting, and Percy suddenly sees him, clutching Marley's hand, his face pale and beaded with sweat, Marley's tears dripping onto his chest, and Percy feels his father reach inside himself and say, I will not leave her to do this alone. You fool, Tom thinks contemptuously, and Percy distantly feels his body scream as Tom tears at Arthur and Percy's magic. Dad, please, Percy thinks, and Arthur inside the burrow says weakly, Percy. I will kill you, Tom whispers blackly. I see your soul, and you are a liar, Percy, and a traitor. I will kill you, and it will last for an eternity. No, thinks Arthur fiercely, and Percy sobs from the burning feeling of his father gathering his strength. I will kill you and make him watch, or maybe I will make him kill you. Everyone breaks by the end, Percy, and you will break easier than most. I know your soul. I see it whenever you face me. That is the wisdom of the diadem, you know. It is not for book knowledge or curses. It will not answer every question you have, but it will show me everyone's soul, and yours is unsalvageable. You will die even without my help, Percy Weasley, and you will beg for mercy before the end. Tom reaches out and touches something inside Percy, that same something that has been eluding Percy, slipping into the edges of his consciousness while he doses himself with various combinations of ingredients. Percy inhales sharply, sucking in a breath as his chest grows cold. For a second he sees a flash of evergreen trees, of a cold grey glistening lake, of warm yellow lights in high drafty towers, and he is oddly relieved, comforted even. Then Tom laughs, and the sound echoes in Percy's head, hammering into his skull. The image in front of him flickers, and then splinters, and he's returned to the awful tableau of Arthur the portrait layered over Arthur the man, the two images superimposed like layers of paint. Leave my son alone, Arthur thinks, or maybe yells, and Percy winces as Marley clutches his hand tighter and sends her magic into the whirling tangle inside her husband. His mother's magic tastes like mint. He realizes dizzyingly, like rosemary, like the small tray of herbs she perpetually had growing in the kitchen windowsill. His mother's magic tastes like earth, and his father's like heavy rain, and the feel of it grounds Percy, whose body is as light and unfettered as ash spinning from a burning tree. Stop it, orders Tom harshly. No, his father says simply. There are no dramatic speeches, no youthful declarations of glory, but Arthur steadies himself against the solid feel of his marriage bed. Percy feels the weight on his back, feels a ghost memory of his hands smoothing the wood, understands suddenly that Arthur built that bed the Muggle way for Marley, like the wizard Odysseus in the old myths, and his wife's hand, and pushes back with all the defiance of a father who's had his family challenged one too many times. Tom howls in pain and agony, and Percy howls with him as he is pulled sickeningly into another memory. Suddenly, it is not his father in front of them, but Tom's, looking as much like Tom as Arthur does Percy. On his face, the same cold disdain that Tom employs to great effect. Percy feels their hand tighten around Tom's wand, sees the handsome features of Tom Riddle in front of him shaped into a new face, and hears the sound of their fathers pleading for mercy. You shall have exactly as much mercy as you showed me, Tom tells his father, and twists his wand in a complicated fashion. He calls upon the ancient gods, presents his mother's ancestral ring, and demands they aid him in this task for glory. Percy and Tom scream as the guards, or whatever energy gathers in the strange, crackling clouds ahead, accept Tom Riddle's life, as the magic snags on the moment that his soul splits, as the gush of pure, elemental magic present even in a muggle's dying wish is ripped forcibly from Riddle. They scream as the black, oily magic reaches out its tendrils, reaches out to the only soul in the room, and burrows itself insidiously in Tom's flesh. No, Tom yelps in fear. I cannot bear it again. And this time Percy screams alone as Tom wrenches himself away from the memory of his father, and Percy falls heavily back into his body. His father's portrait bleeds. The blood drips from the bottom of the canvas, as if the entire painting is drenched. Percy blinks hazily at it, and then up at Tom's portrait, where Tom lays sprawled on the floor, unconscious. He may not be dead, Percy thinks, but he cannot bring himself to move. Drip, drip, drip. Something's wet on Percy's face, and it feels like blood. Dad. Dad may not be dead either. This thought fills him with more urgency. He clutches his wand tightly and prays for a patroness. His first attempt produces only most, but Percy reaches desperately for the image of the trees and the lake and the castle that had come to him for one silver shining moment. He is not happy, not optimistic, not anything other than determined as he gasps, expecto patronum, but perhaps that singular moment of clarity was sufficient. A bird unfolds out of his wand, more a silver shimmer than an actual shape, like a mirage glimpsed in a puddle on the road. Bill Weasley, he gasps. Dad, the burrow, go quickly. And then he slides sideways off the couch and collapses into the blessed peace of oblivion.